Hey guys, it's Bree, and today is going to be a quick spoiler-free review of The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenfold. So The Five is a nonfiction following the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper, who was the very famous Victorian serial killer that was never caught. He had 5 identified victims that it's widely reported were all prostitutes. Hallie in this book is attempting to prove, or at least shed some doubt on the fact that all 5 women were in fact prostitutes. I believe only one of the victims is actually confirmed to have worked as a prostitute in her life. So the 5 victims are Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane. I believe Mary Jane was the youngest as well as the only confirmed prostitute. And Hallie works through it's a little over a 300-page book to shed some doubt on whether these women were in fact sex workers, were they just in the wrong place at the wrong time, were they actually Jack the Ripper's victims, because there's some doubt about the women that were killed around this time in Whitechapel. Were they actually his victims? Were they just similar killings? Were there more victims that could have been counted in? And she explores that. I gave this book 4.5 5 stars. It was very interesting. She does a good job of shedding doubt on their lives. What they did all have in common was the neighborhood they lived in before they died, which was Whitechapel, I believe. They all seemed to have difficulties with drinking that led them to have these greater difficulties that put them in these dangerous situations. They all had struggled with financial problems at the end of their lives. Many of them started in kind of middle-class families, and for whatever reason there were divorces, substance abuse such as alcohol and things like that, that led them to then be on the streets or in boarding houses and having to sleep rough some nights. There's also the debate of how they were killed, because she argued a lot of them were found kind of slumped as if they'd been asleep on the streets rather than working as prostitutes. So she does a really good job building this up, and if you're interested in kind of cultural history, she does a great job of shedding some light on the working poor in Victorian England, which isn't explored too much. A lot of times you see middle class or very wealthy in fiction and nonfiction. This focuses on your middle class to lower middle class to very poor, and how the Victorian era played out in their lives and how it was different from what you are used to seeing in like TV and other popular books. It was overall very interesting. I enjoyed it. Each woman, she fleshes out her life as much as she can from records, obviously. It's very well researched. The only complaints I had were it did become a little bit repetitive, because the first 4 women were all about similar age, have really similar histories, and there were times where it felt like you could have said she was similar to the first victim or the second. Instead, it was the same information repeated, making it feel a little bit repetitive, but it was necessary to give each woman's life a fuller view. So overall, if you're interested in Victorian history, true crime, it's great, and she does a great job of setting out to what she planned on doing. She does. There is doubt. Mary Jane, I believe, was the youngest victim. Yes, and she was the one that it is known worked as a sex worker, and she was the final victim. If you know anything about Jack the Ripper's victims, they were killed mostly on the streets. The neck was where they were cut. She was killed in her own apartment, and it was much more grotesque than the other killings. So she kind of sheds doubt on, was she also a victim? Was it escalation, or is this a separate crime? So overall, if you're really into history and things like that, I definitely recommend checking this one out. If you're looking for a biography of Jack the Ripper and the crimes, it's less that and more of a focus on his victims. It is what the title says. You're going to get to know these 5 women, their children, their dreams, how did they start, their parents, and things like that. And there's times where it's definitely a depressing read, but I think it's greatly done. She did great with her research, with the prose, just sticking to the facts of how it was. So I definitely recommend checking this one out, and happy reading, guys.